Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is Bradley Baer. He's a certified peer recovery counselor and the director of Family and Children's Association's Sherpa program. This program manages a team of certified recovery peer advocates who are trained to meet with individuals and families within hospitals and the community who are struggling with substance use disorder. All right, Bradley, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Just to kick things off, how many kids do you have?
Just the one.
Yeah. And that's a loaded question because I knew that. And how old?
Tomorrow he'll be 9 months old. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I said before we recorded, I said, "How you doing?" You said, "Tired."
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like until they're like 3, you just give up on anything that feels like a normal sleep schedule.
Yeah, he's pretty good at night. It's just the day naps kind of go awry most of the time.
And it's a weird pace, right? I mean, they're doing a lot, but they don't do much at night. You know, he's not walking,
No,
so
he's very mobile though. He'll crawl everywhere around the house. He'll stick his hands in the dog bowl.
Yeah. I remember like, oh, I have to move my records higher now. Like you move your stuff up that you don't want damaged. Is he like a normal crawler? Normal, that's a terrible word. Does he have a traditional crawl? Like my oldest, who's 21 now, did like that commando crawl thing. And he was so fast.
He like tucks his leg under to sit up straight. But if he wants to go, he will be gone. Like yesterday, my partner was just getting dressed and he was kind of crawling down the hallway and she put on a shirt and turned the corner and he wasn't there anymore. So
the child has vanished.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's so much development at that age. It's pretty wild. Do you always want to be a dad? Is that was always on your radar or?
So yes and no. Like yes for the wonder of it, but no, because I wasn't responsible enough to take care of a whole human being. So I didn't really grow up until I entered recovery. So until I was 28, like the idea sounded nice, but what actually comes with it, I definitely wasn't ready for.
I mean, good job not doing it in advance because that is not 100% always the scenario. Can you kind of dig in a little bit? However you're comfortable telling that sort of story of entering into recovery and sort of what led to it?
Sure. So I think what led to it is a few factors, right? So in recovery, I've been able to kind of explore and receive a diagnosis in mental health that I asked for in 6th grade. And along with that, I also have mental health and substance use in my family. So there is a genetic component. I also believe that the town that I live in contributes to a decent amount of that. We live on 3 miles of beach. There's not much to do except drink and use, especially, when I was growing up in middle school. I think I started like drinking weekends or like once a month when I was about 11 or 12. I also am the youngest of 7 kids. So my closest brother should be 40 now because I'm 35. So even when I was younger, he would have friends over and there was like a designated area where they would drink. And part of what I consider to be my disease today is I have to be there. So even though I was 11 or 12, I would pretend to be asleep for a little while, and then I'd sneak down and join them, so nobody would know, but everybody knew. And yeah, there's also a progression story of moments in my life where I experienced grief. In particular, like 2008 was one of the more recognizable ones. It's when a cousin of mine completed suicide. Um, and then towards the end of my college career, well, not receiving a degree, but definitely leaving, um, sparked another progression. A lot of grief, specifically, um, pity. Right? How come I have to leave without getting a degree? Meanwhile, I was using and not going to class, and with attendance counting for a percentage of your grade, didn't go over well for me. Um, and then it continued to progress. Like there was a point where I was going to an outpatient, um, and doing like pretty well, but I had a drug test for a job, and they did a hair sample. I thought I was gonna, I thought I was gonna pee in a cup or get a. Yeah, so they did a hair sample. Yeah, I think I had some like 100 days, and I was like trying to get it back on my feet, and I knew that the hair sample wasn't coming back the way it needed to. So I kind of ditched my responsibilities and kind of went off again. Um, in the end, it looked quite sad. My parents were done with me. Um, I ended up going into a program and really putting my hands up and saying, you've got an inpatient, you've got an outpatient, you've got recovery housing. Like, take me and tell me what to do. And then from there, I kind of got uh, reintegrated into a recovery community I had stood in, but not inside the circle of. And then I got a scholarship to become a recovery peer advocate, and I've been doing that for 6 years, 5.5, 6 years.
Yeah. Where did they take you? Were you in a residential, or, how did that kind of play
No,
out?
so it was so I went standard 28-day inpatient, and it's the same agency that has all step down levels. So they have their own outpatient, and their recovery home is managed by like the overall company, but it's considered shelter housing. So through the county, it's qualified to be a shelter housing unit. Um, and I think at some point there were like 21 guys in one house, some four to a room, some three or two. Um, no singles, but you know, DSS paid the rent, and we got food and went to treatment outpatient and kind of
Yeah, I
stepped
mean, it
down to the.
really, yeah, I was having this conversation with someone Thursday about, and we're talking about unhoused and, kind of the whole world of people who are unhoused, people who are using and like needing, like starting with housing, right? Like some people have got to just start with a roof over their head, but they need services just to get that roof over their head. They're not even ready necessarily to try and step into recovery, but they'll never do it if they don't have that first step into some housing with some services to just help get them stabilized. I mean, there's some new housing in, the community where I work, and there are people who have apartments, but they still sleep outside because they didn't build in any services, right, to help people. You can't just be like, oh, here, four walls and a roof. Like, here you go. You should be grateful. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and the paperwork is not easy to fill out either, right? It's like a packet this thick, and then you bring it up to the desk and they, circle a bunch of stuff you did wrong. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
and no one to just help you walk you through it.
right, yeah.
So, so in that process, you've kind of, did those 28 days and you step down. Do you do a program now, or how do you maintain?
Yeah, so I'm still a part of, I don't say I have one in particular 12-step family, but a lot of people in my particular community, um, I'll see on the street or I'll see in a church basement. I also utilize coworkers, so like most, if not all, people that work where I work are in some form of recovery themselves. So I can walk down the hall and pick somebody's ear about something for a minute, and then me and my partner do couples counseling, and then next week I'm uh, I'm getting my own personal counselor. So
Yeah, like
therapy's big.
that combo is good.
Yeah. Um, I see a psych MP. I have a social worker available at work, and then um, being in both the professional and recovery space, I have a ton of social worker friends. If I don't want to say it to my own person, they'll entertain me once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, it goes down to like having that community and those resources out there. I mean, there's sort of the friendship community, but also that access to professionals that can help you, around mental health, right? Like some people are going to need medical mental health interventions. Like you can do a 12-step program, but if you're, you know, extremely depressed or have some other mental health issues, it might require medication, and having those resources and access to those resources is super important. And it seems like it's getting harder and harder um, for people to find.
Yeah, yeah. Access has never been fantastic. What is nice is at least a lot of the programs out here on Long Island do kind of integrate that into their treatment. Um, so especially in early recovery, because I think a counselor of mine told me like SSRIs are the number one prescribed medication in early recovery. Um, for me, my drug of choice was cocaine, so the dopamine drop and depression after stopping was significant to a point where sometimes the only way to kind of get that back would to go find it again,
Yeah.
find it again.
Right, and to manage those early stages, and also just to, you know getting off even just alcohol, right? Like for people who are severely alcoholic, just stopping drinking is not necessarily safe. So needing medical interventions, or people will take their SSRI and drink, which totally makes it not work. Which
Right.
I went on an antidepressant, and the doctor never said, "Don't drink when you take this."
Right. Yeah,
It
that's a piece
seems
too.
pretty
Like
basic,
even
right?
yeah, even in receiving the care, it's like here's your prescription. I personally read all of the info packets that they connect to it, but um, some basic information and how it interacts with other things should be always talked about.
Yeah. Are you guys a sober house?
Yeah, yeah. So it's me, my partner, a baby, and a dog. So she's also in recovery. Um, about I'm about 6.5 years in recovery. She's about five and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, we're a sober house, and my wife just yesterday was 6 years for her, and I'll be 15 early next month. So, and it's so foundational to who we are. Like
Mhm.
we met as sober human beings, like that's the only way we know each other. That's the only way my stepkids know me is, as someone in long-term recovery. Like I've entered that phase where it just never even occurs to me that drinking would be a good idea, even with like my mom's having health issues and all that and other stresses. It's just not, it's not a blip. And I feel like most people can get there. It takes just time. And,
Yeah.
I did a lot of therapy along the way. And, I don't think there's any necessarily one way for people to do it. But definitely you got to have something other than just stopping the substance, because you got to dig into most people have a reason, be it a chemical imbalance of mental health or whatever it is, or childhood trauma or whatever it is. There's generally something behind the drug or alcohol use. So just stopping is not really, you're just going to shift. You might not drink, but you're going to find another way to kind of feed that need.
Yeah, and I think in particular when I was talking about like grief progressing my disease, it's because I didn't know how to deal with grief, right? Like, and feeling that was so uncomfortable that the only thing I knew how to do was to drink or to use. And also, I forget what you just said, but I had a response, but it must not have been
What
important.
was I? Of course, I forgot what I just said too, because I'm getting old. But yeah, I mean, I think taking sort of grief as an example of, right, it comes in life, and I don't even remember who said this, but someone was saying like, grief is an expression just of all the love that's still there, and you have to give, and you don't know what to do with it. Like I don't know if anyone's good at it, right? It's one of those things that I always feel like you just got to lean into and just keep, like, get up every day, like, and work your way through it. But if you haven't built resiliency, growing up, like, ideally, you learn how to become emotionally resilient from when you were a baby, and you have like zero emotional resiliency. And as you get older, ideally, you've built up that muscle, right? But
Mhm.
if you haven't, and all of a sudden a death or whatever hits you, or some other crisis, or you lose a job or whatever it is, you just spin out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's, you know, to that point, that's like what recovery looks like for me today, right? Like, um, showing up, but especially when I don't feel like it, um, and the consistency, right? So, no matter what, every morning I take my dog and my son strapped to my chest and we go for our walk, 20-30 minute walk. And it's almost a form of meditation, but it's just nice to kind of be out there together, um, doing that thing I like to enjoy, and then I get home and the chaos starts. So
Yeah.
uh, it's kind of like the baseline to begin the day, you know.
Yeah, I liked the snuggly when mine were little. Like I just, there's something about that I just kind of loved, putting the kid in the snuggly and going out. And I think, right, being outside and almost meditative, and like being with your kid, like to me that's so grounding to like be with your kids. And like it's hard being a parent, and I've done it for a long time, and it's, I mean, I have one adult child and a 17-year-old, and then my stepkids, who are really just my kids, are 8 and 13. So I've like done it for a while, and I've been through all the stages multiple times, but it still doesn't mean it's always easy. It's just not easy all the time. Sometimes it's incredible and amazing, and sometimes you're just tired, or you're not feeling well, or whatever, but you still got to like show for your kids.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
just,
and that. that's kind of the um, like the big lesson I took from one of my counselors early on in recovery was it life itself isn't easy, right? If you even take out the parenting portion of it. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to do my taxes properly um, and all that fun stuff. But when I entered recovery, like I had to relearn how to do laundry and brush my teeth, and um, I don't have to show up and be fantastic about it. You know, showing up is kind of the minimum that needs to be done, and then trying my best while I'm there with what I have to give.
Yeah, what do they say? Progress, not perfection. Because I also think perfection is really dangerous. I mean, there's this period after I got divorced where I was like trying to be like the perfect dad, and I wasn't as good of a dad because I was like just trying to be this like perfect parent. It just doesn't exist, right? Like it's not a thing, but you can get so caught up in this like trying to or work or whatever it is, right? And then you learn to this fear of making mistakes. I mean, mistakes just happen, right? Like learning how to respond to your mistakes and grow from your mistakes is sort of the thing. But there's no way to avoid them. And I remember saying to my kids at one point, like, no one promised you like a flat road with no bumps and no curves. It just is not, it's not a thing. Life throws stuff at you. Like, not to dig too far into politics, but like this week's felt pretty chaotic, like, like hold the fuck on, everybody. Um,
Yeah.
and having that it's that back to that sort of skill set and resiliency thing, um, and having a community to stand with, I think is so important.
Yeah, and also no matter what's happening at that level, like we still need to eat today. So somebody's got to get on the stove and make what needs to be made. And those are the things that we can control in that respect. Where it's fried chicken instead of broccoli, chicken, and rice.
Right.
And finding like empowerment in those small choices like helped me build an early recovery, and now those choices are larger, but I'm not gonna show up at the White House and change everything, right? So
I mean, you could try, but it's hard to get in, I think.
yeah.
Can't just knock on the door. But yeah, and I think you're sort of talking about those small changes leading to big changes. I mean, my wife always talks about figure out what the right thing is and do it. And then you do the next right thing and the next right thing after that. Like you don't have to, it's what's that thing they say, how do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time. You don't have to do the whole thing. You just need to do the next thing that's the right thing. Because sometimes looking at the whole thing, it's that notion of one day at a time, right? You don't have to worry about being sober for 40 years. You just need to worry about being sober right now,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
And then the next time you're struggling, you just need to remember to be sober right then. And then it stacks up. And my experience was it does get easier. You learn your triggers and you learn, I mean, being in a sober house certainly helps. I had a friend and her ex-husband, like she was, raging alcoholic of the level of like stopping to get a 40 to drink on the way
Mhm.
home, while driving. And she was sober, but he just kept beer in the house. I was like, this seems disrespectful. Do you like beer so much? I don't know. I always struck me as really like the frosted pint glass in the freezer just seemed so weird to me. I'm like, I don't know. It just seems like for my spouse or whatever, I would stop. Like it seems an unnecessary thing to like create temptation for somebody, but I guess everybody's going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that the same way I can't control other people, um, staying authentic to the choices that I've made is my responsibility. So, I went to in my first year of recovery, I went to like two weddings. One of those I was the designated driver for the bride and groom, and the bride ended up throwing up when I got them home. So that's
Good
a nice
wedding.
reminder that I was, doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And also, like, all of the friends I had before recovery in the small town still, bartend at restaurants and slide me a beer even though I don't want one, and I just slide it back, right?
Yeah.
And they're not going to a know that I'm in recovery and what my choices were, and b they don't care, right? So to that point, like, it's all internal. It's an internal job as far as building my emotional resiliency and intelligence. My One of my counselors had me write in columns like what really set me off, like what was the event, how was I feeling at the time, and then what behavior did I use to not feel it. And after doing that for about a month, I said, "Oh, I avoid this because it's uncomfortable." and
Yeah.
and living through knowing that information, um, when I see myself avoiding something, I have to stop and be like, "Oh, let's just go head on, no matter how fearful I am at this time." Right? Uh,
Yeah, that's a great tool because, like, I'm a people pleaser of like epic proportions. And I said to my office, like, I just want to make everybody happy. She's like, you can't, like, that's not a thing. So that's like something I had to learn was like saying no to things, both at home, but in work, and it's almost in some ways harder to say no to your boss, especially if you're like, for me, I was like a single parent. I was like, I need this money. I got no cushion. So you like contort yourself. And I really had to unlearn um, those behaviors. I wanted to go back because I grew up in a small town in Maine. So all the parties were on the power lines, right? And I think, and I live in a pretty small community now. And it's hard, right, to be like a teenager in a town where there's not a lot going on, right? There's
yeah.
no, I lived in the suburb of Portland, Maine. So like I could go to shows, like I could go out, see music. Like my parents were pretty chill, so we'd like go with friends. We'd go to Boston for shows and stay with somebody's mom. But some small towns are like super isolated and there's just not a lot to do. And so kids sort of just gravitate towards the party. Um, or adults, like it's just it's an interesting dynamic, I think, that doesn't get talked about a lot in like substance abuse in the larger conversations. Like people always think about what they're seeing in urban areas, especially
Mm.
with fentanyl and all that, but it's real in small towns for sure. And like the whole crisis with Oxy totally hit small town America, like big time.
Yeah. I mean, substance use disorder doesn't discriminate, right? So it's everywhere. And having an entire town of beach, is, if somebody calls the cops on one street, you move down the beach to the next
Yeah.
street. So there's like little tricks I learned when I was in seventh grade to kind of like stay out of trouble a little bit as well. To really have no consequences until I was about 26, which,
Yeah, the consequences are sure different when you're 26 as opposed to like 13.
yeah.
Though the consequences for 13-year-olds can be pretty real too. But yeah, once you're an adult, like the stuff stacks up. And if you haven't learned sort of what's considered within like that sort of sphere of acceptable professional behavior or personal behavior, like that can in and of itself sort of isolate you. Or I remember I had a boss that said about someone else in work, like that person has some professionally limiting personality traits. So they hadn't
Sure,
sort of
really nice
learned
way to say
along the way. I know I didn't actually really like this boss very much, but I thought that was it was like this weirdly political yet insightful thing to say. And then you're always
it.
like,
Yeah.
what are they saying about me? Um, but you know, like what was behind that is that person didn't learn how to play well with others. And so they're a difficult person to work with, which is not really like you don't want to be at work the person that people are like, I don't want to work with that guy. He's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Or loses his
No.
temper or whatever it is. So we have a mutual, I mean, I can't really say I know Jason, but so Jason, you know, who I interviewed, hooked us up. And he said, talk about music and talk about tattoos. So,
Oh, cool.
what was your first tattoo?
On my back, it is Frank from Donnie Darko, the bunny rabbit.
Ah,
Um, and it's got the timestamp from the beginning. So the countdown until Halloween, when the
nice.
world ends, quote unquote, for Donnie Darko.
Yeah, mine was a sun, which seems so freaking like cliche now, but there's so many others that are kind of on there that my mom at one point just gave up, like wondering what was going on. But like, music-wise, when you were talking about, you know, it's in, you know, internal work. There's this Pearl Jam song, "Inside Job." Do you know that song?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, like the guitar, one of the guitarists who's in recovery, you know, wrote it about that very thing. And I've always thought that was like a pretty, like, that should be like a sing along in recovery or something. But, you know, it's such an important lesson on how to figure out how to do that internal work. I mean, that work's the scary work too. But for me, like music's always kind of held me up through all that stuff.
Mhm.
And like still does. I'll say music saves my life like all the time. You know, like if I'm struggling, I'll put music on and it really like carries me through.
Yeah. Like while I was active, um, well, I had taken a bunch of acid and listened to three Nine Inch Nails albums, which was, you know,
Not a healthy choice.
it was an experience that ranged, you know, the full spectrum of
Yeah.
emotion. um, and, you know, I ended up seeing them at Radio City, which was, I mean, I was living in the sober house, but I was allowed like Saturday privileges.
Yeah.
And it really changed the unhealthy experience to a different one for me. You know, when he played All the Love in the World. I I don't know how long before that time he had played it live, but you know, while I was using, I saw like a color scheme with notes, and then in recovery, I saw this. You know, it was almost like a euphoric recall where I saw the same notes, but the wonder was like, oh, I can have this enjoyable experience no matter what I'm doing, right? Like it's not dependent on me taking X, Y, or Z and showing up to the venue, um, which
Yeah,
is
and that can be
really
hard. Like
important
he's
lesson.
also sober, right? So
Mhm.
um but I know like I love seeing music, and I interviewed one guest and she was talking about like, oh my God, am I ever gonna get to go out and see music again? And fortunately, like a lot of like festivals for sure sort of have these sober communities that are part of them. I interviewed a guy who's part of like the rave scene and is this whole sober you know, component of that. So that's been a pretty nice, you know, thing for people to go to shows and have that.
a lot of like jam type bands do the yellow balloons at intermission, and I mean there's nothing restricting me from enjoying something that I had to rediscover I enjoyed in recovery, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially something like music, but and more venues too, there's just NA choices, there's just I understand the economy of a lot of shows and selling, alcohol is kind of a part of it, but I've been really heartened by clubs that have tons of NA beer. I get that's not for everybody. Some people just can't do that. Other people can. Like I said, recovery looks a lot of different ways, but um, venues are a little less dependent because now they can sell you a $10 NA beverage instead of water. I just always got seltzer,
Instead
but
of a $6 water.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, there's one place in Ithaca. It's a bar. It's nice. It's like for grown-ups, and like if you just get seltzer, that's free. They don't even charge you for it. It's interesting. Like their bartenders don't. It's not tip based. It's living wage. So they're really trying to do something kind of different. They did sober Sundays for a while, so that was kind of a cool thing. And so other people like their other sober kind of events and DJ things and all that stuff that's coming out. So it feels like a kind of a time where it's more acceptable and you have to explain yourself less. Like you can kind of just say I don't drink now. And I feel like when I stopped drinking, 15 years ago, people always just assumed that meant there was issues. So I always, for a while, would just say I was straight edge. It was like an easier explanation to me to be like not wanting to delve into talking about me needing to not drink and just being like, yeah, I just choose sobriety, which is a true thing. I choose sobriety. Like every day I choose sobriety. But I feel like now, like in my office, like the younger staff, it's like diminished interest in alcohol, I think is a healthy thing. The health research coming out is pretty strong against alcohol. 10 years ago, they were trying to convince you that wine was going to make you live forever. Um,
Yeah.
like drink that red wine and chocolate. You'll just live to be 200 years old.
Right.
But
Yeah, and
but
then I
that's
mean
like, go ahead.
the culture around finding out like what's true about alcohol is literally a poison that we decide to put into to our bodies at some point. Um, People are finding, well sourced written studies with actual facts about what it does chemically.
They're
So,
not doing their own research and making up their own facts about science. But you're right. In cigarettes, if you look at, I mean, I love the show Mad Men, and if you look at that time or me growing up as a kid in the 70s, like everybody smoked, like there's the smoking section in every restaurant on every plane. And I remember when I guess it was in the late 80s or early 90s when bars started banning smoking. And it was so much nicer to go see shows. Like I used to have a winter coat that was like the show coat because it would get gross because it would
yeah,
just smell like smoke. So you'd have the winter coat that you brought, or you'd leave yours in the car and you'd run inside and freeze. But I was like, this is so dumb to have a winter coat that I don't mind smelling like smoke just so I can go see music. And there was that uproar. People were like, we're going to like lose business. And none of that happened. Like so many more people were excited to not like go get lung cancer while seeing a band.
yeah,
I mean, the funny thing, like I'm seeing now, and you probably see too, is sort of, and I'm, no one should go to jail for doing drugs, but like weed now, and because we're both in New York State, like I mean, people are
mm,
driving and smoking weed. I'm like, I don't think that was the spirit of the law.
no, I don't think so either.
Right?
Yeah,
Like, at home, like, whatever, do your thing. But, like, I don't really think you're supposed to, like, you couldn't drive with a beer. So I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to drive with a joint.
yeah, I think they were trying, at some point to get a breathalyzer for marijuana, but I don't I don't know if it took off, and I don't know if it
A
actually.
weedalizer.
Yeah. Um, but I'll say when I went to visit Colorado, it was fantastic, right? So in Golden, Colorado, you're not allowed to smoke in the whole town. um, and even when we were at Red Rocks for the show we went to, security wasn't trying to get anybody in trouble. They were going up to the guy who was sitting down on whatever he was doing and asking him if he needed water or helping him move to where he was going.
Yeah.
And it was just like a totally different experience. It was I was like a bit shocked, and also it made me feel like comfort in a larger sense.
Yeah. Well, like it's safety. Yeah, I think New York's kind of bungled the way it rolled out legalization. But so I've never been to Red Rocks. It just seems spiritual to see music there. Like that's my sense of that venue.
Yeah, we were there. We saw King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard. Um,
Band with an excellent name.
yeah, we ended up leaving a little early because we had flown in that night and then went directly to the show. So we didn't even meet up with my friends who we were staying with yet. Um, and the vibe was fantastic. The seating's interesting. It's just kind of long benches.
Right, it's bench. Yeah, so you got to be nice.
Yeah, yeah. But the community that showed up were kind, and if you're looking at your friend down the row, people are moving. They're not.
Yeah, like that's sort of a cool thing, right? That I talk a lot about just community um and I had this. I was at my youngest basketball game today. Pretty rural community. I was looking around, and I'm like, I gotta stop like looking at people kind of like the enemy and like, where are you politically? And just be like, no, you're my neighbor. Like we can disagree and we can agree and all that, but here we are at this event for our kids, right? Like we can at least come together with that. And it was this moment. It really was, since the inauguration, when I was like, because it's getting weird out there. And, ICE is trying to get into elementary schools but I was like, okay, but my job is also to like pull community together, and I think Red Rocks in a way with those benches is this interesting like example of that because everybody's there for this shared purpose. You don't say to them, oh, well, who did you vote? I see you want to sit with your friend down there, but who'd you vote for? No one's doing that, right? They're just like, oh, I see your friends are down here. Let us like just shuffle around for you.
Yeah, yeah. It's not. It's not that inconvenient to make a gesture of kindness, right? Um, and that's kind of like where I am doing my best to try to live my life today is live that kindness or live that example of continuing to be as responsible and as I can and showing up as much as I can, and putting in um, me and my partner use the term like I have no spoons left. So that means like one of us has to tap out and the other has to take over. And even if I have one or zero spoons, like I'm still doing the best that I can to kind of take care of it.
Yeah, who is it? Brene Brown, Brene Brown. She's like has a version of that she's talked about with her husband. Like they'll get home from work and they'll be like, what's your percentage? Like, are you at 50? Are you at 90? Because like we can't both be at 50. We can both be at 90 for sure. But if we're both at 50, we're gonna have to figure out how to get everyone fed into bed, right? Like, or like the note, right? If you're both out of spoons, then you got to be like, oh, we're both out of spoons. Like, we need to equal one spoon. So how are we going to do it?
Right, right. Even if we hold hands while we pick them up, right?
Yeah, right. Like, and that, but that just builds the relationship, right? Because that's just this healthy, like people are always afraid of asking for help, right? At home, at work, like, but to sort of acknowledge, like, I'm not at my best right now, and I'm hoping you have a little extra, and the next time it's reversed, like I got you, you know, like that's just it's. We always talk about with my wife, like trying to be intentional. You know, we met in COVID, so like our relationship was built on intention because it was had to like figure out how to like we went for walks, right? Like it was weird old school dating, you know, but you know, sort of going at every day and every action intentionally, like thinking about what the action is and what its impacts will be has been like it's just a healthy approach to life.
Yeah, and also it helps with expectations. So if I know that she has no spoons, then I know that I can prepare to do the things
Right.
mentally.
You don't say, ha ha ha, I have all the spoons. Ha.
Right. I could have, two spoons or whatever.
Yeah.
But it allows me to internally be like, okay, I might not have been ready for this, but we gotta get ready to do it because this is where we're at as a team.
Right. Baby's got to eat. Yeah.
Mm.
And that is that sort of team thing, you know, because I've done both, like a partnered parent and an unpartnered parent. And the unpartnered times were hard because there wasn't anybody to share spoons with. You know, you're just like, here I am. I gotta like muster what I can do. Um, you know, but that's also life, right? Like sometimes you have bad days and you still gotta like show up. You can't just
Yeah,
tap out. And I think that's like a thing, helping kids learn that along the way. It's like, yeah, you're allowed to have a bad day, but you're not allowed to have the bad day blow up everybody's day. Like I will help you find a way through it, but like, could you imagine showing up to work like acting like a 13-year-old who's having a bad day and it's like blah, blah, blah. Like no, you couldn't do that. I mean, some people do, but you can't do that, right? And so like teaching kids those skills along the way is super important because it's hard to find your way out sometimes, which is why also people will turn to substances because it's hard to find your way out. So if you can get a quick exit strategy or like, you know, a blotto strategy, like, well, that worked. I just avoided all the stuff I didn't want to deal with.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I did for 20 something years. But when it was time to really turn and face it, that was kind of it. I think I delayed finding recovery until I knew I was willing to face it. Um, being unhoused helped to a point. Um,
Yeah, I mean it doesn't help everybody, but um you know, I interviewed one guy who's like living under a bush, you know, but you know, he does incredible things. But that's also the story, right? And the reason behind this podcast in a lot of ways is like, yeah, like okay, you were unhoused, but you made your way through. And now you've got a kid and you've got a job and you're, you know, like there is a way through. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a way through for almost everybody.
yeah, and it's unique to everybody, right? My second tattoo is a Magic the Gathering card, the Black Lotus. I don't know if you're familiar, but
You know, my oldest tried to get me into magic, and I will say I just could not understand it. It just seemed like every time we went to Target, he wanted to buy more cards.
no, that makes sense. Yeah. So historically, the Black Lotus is a card that costs 0, and you tap to add 3 mana. So, um, as it relates to my recovery, it was like I was down to nothing, and I played the Black Lotus, tapped it, and then I got I don't know if you can see, it's the album art for Church's "Love Is Dead" album, which
Nice.
it my roommate. Well, I went through a couple roommates in the sober house, but one of them snored so loudly that I like bought headphones off of someone for $10, and I would just play their music all night while I fell asleep. So I figured it was a nice little tribute to throw it on my arm.
Yeah, better than a picture of someone snoring.
Yeah. So I would listen to that album over and over again, and then I would fall asleep to like Mike Birbiglia's stand up, which is still a thing for me. But
Oh, falling asleep to stand-up comedy.
yeah.
Have you watched Baby J? John Mulaney. And
Yes.
yeah, right. That's his last
Yes.
name, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I mean, very funny, kind of dark, but like, he has that whole bit like, you're really super drug addict when you knock on the door of your friend's house and you open the door and you're like, that's an intervention.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
was like Fred Armisen was there.
yeah, like I know you had a pretty high class intervention, but yeah, that's actually for people who haven't seen that. I recommend that. Like it's because it is really funny, but also really like deep. And then he did an interview. David Letterman's got that Netflix
Letterman.
show,
Yeah.
and they talked to like his dad and mom. Like it was really like pretty great. And then he had that other funny thing where he's like, well, my fear was everyone was going to recognize me at rehab. And then he was like, nobody
Nobody cares.
recognized me at rehab. He's like, my new fear, nobody's recognized me at rehab.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of goes along with this one's going to sound like a little tongue twisty, but I had a counselor who said, you're thinking about what he's thinking about you, and he doesn't care about you at all. Right?
Yeah.
So my anxiety plays on, um, kind of similarly to the people pleasing. It's like I want to be this image that people around me perceive to be um, somebody that they like, and nobody cares. Right?
Yeah. Well, this was super fun. I appreciate it. Anything you want to finish off with? Words of wisdom or?
Um, well, I do want to mention, because you said you worked um, in the wine region
Yep.
upstate. So I went to Hobart, um, right on the
Yeah.
lake.
So I'm in Aurora, where Wells College now used to be. So not that far from Geneva, where Hobart was. Geneva's a cool little city.
It can be, yeah.
I mean, not a lot going on.
Yeah. But I did want to go there. But otherwise, just for people who were listening who might not want to try, give it a shot and see if you can do it. And if you can't, there are people in every community across the world who will be able to support you. There are certainly people who've done it within your community and found recovery. You just have to find them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.